Welcome, welcome. Welcome to today's plenary titled Environmental Justice and the Mission of Jesuit Higher Education, the last of 6 plenaries that together have formed the 20th plus 1 anniversary conference of the commitment to justice in higher education. My name is Nancy Tuchman, and I'm a recent graduate from Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service. I concentrated on international environmental peacebuilding. Buttoned up shirt, drenched in extra cologne, I tapped my foot fervently outside Starbucks, waiting at a table for 2, to be joined by who at the time seemed to hold the key to everything I had ever worked towards, a college education. It was my Georgetown University interview. I was prepared because it was going to be me, the first from my small high school to be accepted to Georgetown, the first in my family to attend college. I had never gotten anywhere earlier in my life. With 2 hours to spare, I opened my laptop with my sweaty fingers and scrolled through my notes. It all looked good, except question number 4. I had doubts. Was it appropriate to ask, to what extent do Jesuit values play a factor in student life at Georgetown? At the time, Cura Personalis was no more than a Wikipedia article I had read a couple days beforehand in preparation, and I had never before heard of Pope Francis's Laudato Si encyclical. What I did know was that I wanted to change the world for the better, and the environment was going to be my way of doing it. 4 years of Georgetown later, I had won a $25,000 Laudato Si grant to co-facilitate a waste management educational and training program targeted toward first-year students. I had led a student administration working group to completely redo and renovate the recycling system on campus. I had hosted and organized dozens of on-campus academic and volunteer-based sustainability events, and I had grown aquaponic grass in the basement of Lau Library. Now, after writing and defending my thesis on water peace building on the Kura Arax River Basin in the South Caucasus, I'm on a month-long trip in Armenia to collect preliminary field work in preparation to take my research further, in hopes to open doors for my future and a more sustainable future for a region that has seen more than its fair share of violence and conflict. For me, this is what a Jesuit education is about, and what the promise of integrating environmental justice in college curriculums hold. Me and many like me consider climate change as the largest challenge of our generation. It is incumbent on every university in the country to provide the problem-solving tools and consciousness-nurturing contexts with which students can be empowered by and give power to a harmonized human-environment relationship that replaces today's exploitation and abuse of nature with systems based on regeneration, circularity, resilience, and sustainability. A system that recognizes that inaction is the reason for the food deserts low-income neighborhoods live in, the more intense and frequent storms that ravage vulnerable coastal communities in less and more developed countries, and toxic chemical plants that pollute the air and water of a disproportionate amount of communities of color. To align our thoughts, ideas, and action with practical experience and spiritual morals, we are grateful for the presence of Dr. Nancy Tuchman from Loyola University Chicago for this conference's first ever plenary devoted to environmental justice. In her plenary, Dr. Tuchman will offer thoughts on the precipice of irreversible ecological disaster we stand before, and explain how the global Jesuit community has taken and will continue to take steps to lead the charge in building a more sustainable and environmentally conscious higher education institution. I hope you find her interdisciplinary approach sobering and find inspiration in her practical experience in creating deep-rooted cultural change for environmental progress. After Dr. Tuchman's plenary, please join our final Zoom session at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The link is in the sked. Mike Duffy will moderate this question and response with Dr. Tuchman, and we will close with an Ignatian exam. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Nancy Tuchman, and I'm the founding dean of the School of Environmental Sustainability at Loyola University Chicago. I'm very pleased to be here today at the 2021 Conference on Justice in Jesuit Higher Education. This is the last day of the conference, and we're going to be talking today about environmental justice. The first time, actually, that environmental justice has been on the agenda at our conferences. So I'd like to share my screen and share with you a PowerPoint presentation. Since Father General Kovenbach addressed at Santa Clara University, the AJCU, and this was back in 2000, we have held a social justice conference approximately every 4 years, but environmental justice has not been on the agenda. So why are we bringing it up now, and maybe even starting with what is environmental justice? And I'll start by just putting it into the context of environmental degradation, which is the existential grand challenge of the 21st century. And the reason why I emphasize this is because of the urgency and the complexity and the ultimacy of this problem. If we are not able to protect our planet, if we're not able to get off of fossil fuels and we keep driving climate change, the earth will become uninhabitable for all of its forms of life, including humans. And so this is really an enormous problem that we have absolutely got to tackle. And what happens with all of these issues is there's kind of a convolution or a nexus of many of the ways in which we are degrading our environment. And I've tried to point the main ones out here on this slide, looking at global climate change and all of the unintended consequences of burning fossil fuels, which include rising sea levels, an increased frequency and intensity of different big storm events. And this can lead to extended periods of floods, 5, 6, 7 years of flooding, or the same in terms of extended periods of droughts. And of course, these long periods of flooding and drought cause tremendous food and water insecurity for people and drive people to migrate. And we call these now climate refugees. So in addition to climate change, we're dealing with destruction and use of land and our oceans and our waterways, and frankly, exploitation of these natural resources through things like deforestation, mining, growing palm plantations, overfishing and dumping in our oceans. And this drives extinction of species. It causes ecosystems to become unbalanced and to collapse so that they can no longer provide the ecosystem services that humans rely on. And also, in addition to all of this disturbance, we have tremendous problems with pollution, air, water, soil, and actually all this gets into our food. Toxins that we are spewing into our environment are really getting incorporated into our food, our air, our water, and our bodies. So environmental degradation is a justice issue because, first of all, it most negatively impacts and disproportionately impacts people who are poor or marginalized, those who are most vulnerable and already underrepresented. It greatly impacts youth and future generations because our planet just continues to be more and more degraded over time. And of course, it has huge negative repercussions for God's creation for living organisms that are non-human organisms. So for all of these reasons, this is really a justice issue. Let me give you some examples of how it is a justice issue. So just looking at sea level rises and how they are, these sea level rises are displacing entire small island nations. This is just a small example, a short list of the island nations that are effectively underwater or going underwater. Tuvalu is a good example. It's an atoll, which is kind of just a long, thin strip of land in the Pacific, but they've lost more than half of their land over the last 10 years because of water rising. And then in Kiribati, you can see that their communities are underwater now. It's year-round. It's no longer a seasonal event. So people are really struggling and needing a place to move to. And this is what in part causes climate refugees, not just flooding, but drought as well. Today, there are 25 million people that are displaced either by droughts or floods every year. And these people are on the move and they're looking for a place to find clean water and fertile land where they can make a living. By the year 2050, the World Bank estimates that we'll have another 143 million people that will be climate refugees. So this is a really urgent and enormous problem. Indigenous people around the world have been displaced for decades due to clear cutting, mining, pipelines, any other kind of land use disturbance that destroys their land and pollutes their waterways. Here you can see a group of indigenous people from Ecuador, and these men are patrolling up and down the river to, they live in what's supposed to be a natural preserve. But there are lots of illegal mining operations that somehow get into their land and mine for gold. And here you can see that they've discovered one across the river. These gold miners are using mercury, which is a very toxic, it's a neurotoxin, and it's a very toxic heavy metal. And the mercury helps to separate the gold from the ore. And so it ends up being a waste product. They bring a lot of mercury in, they use it to separate the gold from the ore, and then that mercury goes right downstream and it gets into their drinking water, and it also pollutes the fish and causes the fish to be toxic. Black, Indigenous, and people of color in urban communities are typically located where hazardous waste sites and landfills are co-located. So the wealthy people may live in the nice parts of a community, but the poor people are typically marginalized in these areas that are highly exposed to toxins in their environment. So this is clearly a justice issue. And finally, there's a disproportionate impact on all the living creatures who don't have voices, who aren't in protests, who aren't speaking up, but are obviously being driven to extinction, being driven from their homes. Here you can see two images, a juxtaposition of a before and after mountaintop removal of coal. And this is happening in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia and a few other states. But on the left-hand side, you can see the beautiful topography and all the trees that are covering these Purple Mountains majesty that belong to all of us as a part of our national heritage. On the right, you can see what happens when the mountain tops are blown off with dynamite and the rubble goes down into and fills in the valleys, so you get a much flatter topography. But the worst devastation is that these mountains, once this is done to them and the coal is raked out of, removed from the inside of the mountain, the naturally occurring toxic heavy metals that are deep within, kind of buried within the mountain, are now exposed to air and rain and snow and weathering. And so those mountaintops become, this whole terrain becomes toxic with heavy metals, and all the water that runs off of these mountainsides going into streams causes toxicity in the streams. And so you can see nothing lives there. These are effectively moonscapes. They're toxic. There is no chance of recovery of biodiversity on these mountains once this happens. And it's all done for a very temporary gain of coal, which is no longer even economically feasible. But this is the kind of destruction to nature that also has very negative repercussions on human health and human well-being as well. Finally, the youth. The youth are very much impacted by the degradation of our environment. In the end of the year 2019, Forbes and Amnesty International conducted a survey of people that are younger than 25 years old, Generation Z, and they conducted this survey internationally all around the world. And they asked young people, what are the most important issues facing the world and facing your country? And you'll see the very top issue for Gen Z is climate change. The number 2 issue is pollution. Number 3 is terrorism. And number 4, loss of natural resources. So 3 of the 4 top issues that are of concern for our young people, for the youth, are issues of environmental degradation and therefore environmental justice. So what are we doing to ourselves? Why are we destroying our planet? And what are the drivers of this? Why can't we quickly fix this? It is a very complex, deeply rooted problem in our cultures. But mainstream capitalism is really one of the main drivers for climate change and environmental destruction. And it's because our economic model is based on infinite growth. We always want to push that GDP as quickly as we can and get the GDP to increase. This infinite growth model is based on a planet that is finite in its resources. So it is not sustainable. And what we're effectively doing today is stealing the future, selling it in the present, and we're calling it gross domestic product. Here's how it works. Our economic model is linear. So we basically, this is kind of a cartoon and it's very simplified, but we extract natural resources from the planet. We put them into a factory and we produce goods that oftentimes produce toxins in the production process through both emissions and effluent water. These products go into a big box store where they're sold and distributed. People buy them, consume them, and dispose of them. And the disposal process often will also cause toxic emissions and effluents. But the faster we can make this run, the faster we can push this line, the faster our GDP rises. And so we are incentivized to continually consume and dispose of things. And the disposable culture is really something that is an engine driving our GDP to increase. But over time, we have depleted our natural resources to a point where we're reaching a very urgent situation in nature. And as a result of all of this disposal, the trash in our oceans and our landscapes and underground is piling up, and the toxins are leaking out of all of our, industries, and our landfills are just leaking toxins into our groundwater, into our surface water, into our soils, and certainly into our air. So we're depleting our natural resources, we're building up toxins, getting sick because of it, and all for the purpose of pushing that GDP. We really are coming to a limit, and we've really passed that limit essentially. The only thing that allows us to keep doing this is that there are so many people living in poverty. If we were to raise every human being on the planet, of which there are almost 8 billion people now, if all of those 8 billion people had a higher standard of living to be approximately equal to the average standard of living in this country, we would require 6 planet Earths to provide enough natural resources to produce all the goods that would be consumed, and enough space to accommodate the waste that would be produced as well. So that's clearly terrifically unsustainable. We're way over our bounds in our consumption and our waste production. Instead of this linear economy of take, make, and waste, we really need a circular economy that takes natural resources, makes products, reuses those products again, so that we don't have to take natural resources from the planet. We can take them from our used products. Now, this is kind of a perfect scenario where we have a perfect circle with no waste. But in fact, even if we could reduce our waste, by 50%, so that we would still potentially have a waste stream, and we would still be taking some natural resources, but many of our natural resources are renewable, like forests and fish in the oceans, if we don't overexploit them. So we can take some things from nature, and we can put some waste into nature, and nature will be able to manage that. But we've gone way over the tipping points on both the taking and the putting of the waste. And we really need to develop a much more circular economy, not only in our national and international economy, but in individual organizations, in businesses, in universities, in our homes. We need to have more of a circular economy. And this is really what Pope Francis is calling us to do in his very important encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. So as Jesuit universities, we have enormous leadership that, I'm ever thankful for. Pope Francis and his vision and his pushing us to push Laudato Si into action, and also to the Society of Jesus for the Universal Apostolic Preferences, which really look at how the poor and the excluded are being impacted by all of the activities that we do, including consuming natural resources that disproportionately impact them, and journeying with our youth. How do we give them a hope-filled future if we give them no planet to live on? And of course, caring for our common home, the fourth UAP, is kind of a pitch right down the middle for this work. And so I think we're being called by so many of our Jesuit and Catholic leaders to really step up as Jesuit universities and take this on and move it into action. Jesuit universities are responding, and this is the exciting thing. And what I'm seeing is a response in kind of a two-pronged approach, a response to this environmental crisis. Of course, we have to walk the walk. So each of us needs to make our campuses more environmentally sustainable. We really need to lower our environmental footprint, and that includes our use of energy, our use of water, our use of food, our production of waste. We need to reduce our waste streams, and we need to reduce our consumption of these things on the front end, and do a better job of using and reusing materials once we bring them onto campus. And this is what is really going to lower our environmental footprint and make us more sustainable campuses. And then, of course, the second approach in the two-pronged approach is really the wheelhouse of our organizations, and that is education, higher education. This issue, along with all justice issues, needs to be integrated across the curriculum in all disciplines. But I would also urge that we really strongly consider putting environmental sustainability into the university core curriculum, so that every student, regardless of their major, is exposed and has some degree of literacy about the environmental crisis that we are living in. because it's a disservice to humanity. It's a disservice to society for us to be graduating students that never heard about climate change through their 4 years of higher ed. And worse yet, if they graduate being a climate denier, for example. It's really incumbent upon us to transform these students into change agents for the good and for the commons. This issue, because it's so complex, requires a very interdisciplinary approach. And I find this to be super exciting. And it's a nice way to engage colleagues from other disciplines and build bridges to these other schools and other disciplines, because we are never going to come up with environmental solutions if we're just thinking about it through the lens of science or the science of ecology, even though that may be at the center of the Venn diagram here. Ecology is really the science of understanding the balance of nature and how ecosystems are structured and how they function. We really need to understand that to be able to protect our ecosystems so that they can serve us, by cleaning our air and giving us fresh, clean water and producing the plants and animals and food that we rely on. However, that's certainly not enough. We really need to call on all of the social perspectives that you see in this Venn diagram. So, colleagues from engineering and technology really need to come into play here to develop solutions, as well as the humanists. We need ethics. We need an ethical oversight. We need learning about society and its structures and religion and its structures and how they can be leveraged to care for our common home. And certainly economics and business play an enormous role in helping us to get onto a circular economy. And I know our business schools are already working at the level of the International Association of Jesuit Universities to think about a new paradigm in teaching business education. How do we make it so that we're not teaching this mainstream, linear business model, but we're thinking more about teaching a circular and a regenerative model of business. Also, obviously social, politics, law and governance, that's another big major driver of environmental degradation. Those laws and those policies need to be thinking about future generations surviving on this planet and the natural resources that will be needed. And of course, human health, medical schools, public health schools, nursing schools are all very important in how human health is responding to emerging infectious diseases like COVID-19 and SARS and AIDS. These are all coming from our interactions with nature and our encroachment into nature, as well as obviously the environmental toxicology that's driving so many new forms of cancer and ADD and ADHD and Parkinson's disease. So these things all need to play a role in building an integrated and a very powerful and I think exciting curriculum for our students. And I'll just say that at Loyola, Loyola Chicago has been at this very, we've really put our shoulder into this idea of environmental sustainability now since the year 2002. We have an incredibly green campus. It's in the top 2 to 3% of green campuses in the country. And we also have surveyed our students. When they come to Loyola as freshmen, we ask them, why did you pick Loyola when you were admitted into so many different universities? So when we surveyed them, 48 to 50% of them will state that Loyola's commitment to the environment was either important or very important to their decision to choose Loyola. So this is not, we're not doing this because it's making money, but it is an area of growth in all of our Jesuit universities. And I think because we have Pope Francis and because we have the society's UAPs, we kind of have an advantage to really take the lead and really move this new generation Z into being part of the solution to our environmental crisis. So this takes me to Pope Francis's new 7-year Laudato Si challenge, which is just launching this year. And it's really a call for us to incorporate environmental sustainability into the mission of the university, the strategic plans of our organizations, and certainly into the curriculum and into campus operations. So a little bit of background on the Laudato Si 7-year journey. This is coming out of Pope Francis's office in Vatican City. It's being led by Father Jostrom Isaac Kurithadam. He is better known as Father Josh. He is leading the dicastery for promoting integral human development. And he is leading multiple working groups because the Laudato Si Challenge is designed for people at all levels of organization in our society. For example, from individuals to families to parishes and businesses and universities and hospitals, all the way up these levels of organization in our society. And there's a working group for each one of these kind of levels of organization. So the Laudato Si Universities working group is led by Michael Shook, and he is representing the International Association of Jesuit Universities. He's pulled together 65 members of this working group over the past year, and they represent almost 40 institutions from all 6 regions of the world, across all Jesuit and Catholic universities. On October 4th in 2021, which is the Feast of St. Francis Day, the dicastery will be officially sort of hard launching the Laudato Si plans that come from each one of these working groups. So for each one of these sectors, and that's when you will see the university's platform being launched. And I'm going to give you a sneak peek that Michael Shook shared with me. This platform, which is a website, the homepage, you can see looks kind of like this. It's an introduction to what this 7-year challenge that the Pope is asking us to be part of, what it's all about, what it looks like, what the purpose is, what the expectations are, how do you become a Laudato Si University? It's all sort of here on the homepage. And then we are also featuring universities that are currently embarking on projects, even before the Laudato Si Challenge, new initiatives that are coming on in our universities. And then here are videos of our students across the world who are talking about projects they're doing. The 40 participating universities are listed in a banner, a tape that kind of moves across the bottom of this homepage. And we'd like to put your banner up there as well if it's not already there. This website takes universities through basically 3 steps of, how to organize yourself around the Laudato Si Challenge, and then how to embark on it and carry it out. So the first step here lists the Laudato Si goals. There are 7 goals for universities. For example, they include Goal 1, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, Ecological Economics, which is the circular economy we discussed, Simple Lifestyles, Ecological Education, integrating it into our curriculum, Ecological Spirituality, and community participation. So once you hop on the website and you want to look at each one of these goals, let's say that you click on Cry of the Earth, you'll get a little description of what the Pope is trying to get us to do and how he describes Cry of the Earth. And then if further under Cry of the Earth, you will see what Michael and his working group have developed are a list of activities, and they fall under categories. For example, for Cry of the Earth, one of the categories is protect the climate. Another one, protect and restore biodiversity. And the third one, protect our waterways and our land. And these are all things that we can do on our campuses in our own way. And then across here, on the horizontal axis, you'll see examples of activities that you can undertake on your campus to protect the climate, and this might have to do with reducing fossil fuel consumption and reducing greenhouse gas production. And then there are activities for each one of these categories. But what I'll also point out is that vertically in the first two columns on the left here, these are, if you are a university that has not yet embarked on making your campus more sustainable, there are very early stage steps that you can take, kind of low-hanging fruits, if you will, that don't cost a lot of money, that oftentimes are just behavioral changes that can be done in all of these categories. So these are for universities that are sort of just getting started. And then for intermediate universities that have done quite a bit of legwork but want to take themselves a bit further, they would look at these examples. And then for more advanced universities that have been at this for a while, really pushing themselves to become zero waste and carbon neutral universities, they will embark on these challenging activities that are over here listed on the far right. Step 3, what we're doing with step 3 is we're saying, we understand that so many universities have already embarked on trying to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17. Well, we have made this kind of figure that shows you all of the colorful sustainable development goals that you will recognize here and you recognize in the wheel as well. But we've listed the 7 Laudato Si goals along the bottom, and you'll see how well they align. For example, if you're working on Cry for the Poor, there are all of these sustainable development goals that also fall under Cry, this is Cry of the Earth, and this is Cry of the Poor. So you can see how they beautifully align, and you're not redoubling your efforts and doing a whole new set of goals, but you're actually advancing both the Laudato Si goals and the sustainability development goals as well. And I would also add that we can put the 4 Universal Apostolic Preferences in here, and we have another figure for this that I didn't put on here, but those integrate really beautifully as well. So in other words, this is not a new request. We're not asking people to do more. We're asking you to think about the UAPs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Laudato Si goals as one big compass forward that all help with Cry of the Poor and Cry of the Earth. Okay. And then finally, we have a planner, and this is really helpful. And, expecting, for example, if you spend 7 years on this to really get it launched and to really develop a new kind of an ethic on your campus, the first year you will be planting the seed, and you will be collecting people and finding your champions on campus and building a plan and conducting an assessment of where you are currently on all of these different goals. And then over time, you will build activities into, you will carry out your plan, which will be building activities, building on one another, so that over time, you'll really be able to integrate this into your curriculum as well as reduce your campus environmental footprint. And then finally, we have a lot of resources on this website that I think are very helpful. On the right here, you see foundational documents, including Laudato Si and Healing a Broken World. These are all integrated and on the website. And then also we have comprehensive sustainability tools. So if you're interested in, for example, conducting a baseline metric of what is your environmental footprint, and you don't know how to measure water consumption or greenhouse gas emissions, these tools are very easy and very effective in helping you to understand what is your baseline footprint and how are you going to reduce your footprint over time. So these tools are all available on this website as well. And finally, just courageous leadership. I mean, through education, Pope Francis in his encyclical says environmental education should facilitate making the leap towards the transcendent, which gives ecological ethics its deepest meaning. It needs educators capable of developing an ethics of ecology and helping people through effective pedagogy to grow in solidarity, responsibility, and passionate care. So I just want to give a call out to become a Laudato Si University. And if you want to find this webpage that Michael Shook has built, it will be located on the International Association of Jesuit Universities webpage, iaju.org. And that's where you can access the Laudato Si Challenge platform for Jesuit and Catholic universities, or you can email IJEP, which is International Jesuit Ecology Project, at luc.edu for questions. Thank you very much.